So we're in a streaming era now where it's sometimes easier than ever to take one entire chunk of media and watch it in chronological order and just kind of go over how something evolves and changes in the peaks and valleys of whatever that something is. If you clicked on this video, you probably assuming it's Disney, and that's the case, yes. For whatever reason, I watched every single Disney animated feature in chronological order as they appear on Disney Plus and reviewed them and talked about whether or not I liked them, whether or not they were a success financially and creatively at the time, and whether or not Disney has kind of inflated that success with time. I did all of this on a blog I have. I will put the link in the description where I talk about in pretty good detail all of these movies. So I have seen all of them, every single Disney animated feature, with the exception of one, and I'll tell you about why that is. Why did I do this? I don't know, man. Why does anyone climb a mountain? Why does anyone run a marathon? Why does anyone sit on their couch and over the course of several years watch all the Disney animated features? They just do. For YouTube, I think I'm going to talk about the different eras and how and basically the chunks I broke up for the blogs and talk about them in individual videos. I'm not going to talk, it's been too long to talk about each movie that I experienced, but I may as well talk about them in chunks. When you're talking about Disney animated features, you're kind of talking about the history of animation and feature animation in Hollywood. So there's a lot there's a lot to talk about. As we get started, I may as well say Disney animated features. What is that? That is feature-length movies released by and created by the original Disney Animation Studio and released by Walt Disney Company. So that's a little bit more confusing now when there's a Disney animated feature studio, a Pixar animation studios, a Disney Toons thing. So the long and short of it is Lion King, yes. Goofy movie, no. Toy Story, no. So no Pixar stuff, no random other things, just the Disney animated features all in a row. I might talk about how some of these movies are comparing with how Pixar movies are doing or how other animated features are doing across the industry, but mostly I am going to talk about the Disney animated features. The first era of Disney animation starts in the 1930s, so and goes into the beginning of World War II. This is a very different time, and I think that is very apparent when you watch Snow White, because Snow White, in a lot of ways, feels like a silent picture or a vaudevillain picture. It definitely has influences from an older art form, so it doesn't have a whole lot in common sometimes with modern Disney things like Moana or even from the 90s like Lion King. It is a very, very old picture. So sometimes it definitely feels like it. I personally was kind of bored a lot of the time with this picture. Um, there's a lot of antics. There's a lot of cartoon antics. I think that in general is kind of a hallmark of very early Disney. Is there's a lot of people flexing their animation muscles and doing things that look interesting that might not necessarily move the plot along and might just kind of be a plot stopper, actually, like the dwarves cleaning themselves. So I wasn't super big on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs personally, but it is a very interesting historical watch through. Um, I was a little bit, and obviously that was a giant success for Disney and kind of set the course for the rest of this early part of the company. In that they were going to spend a lot of money on these movies, and perhaps the success of Snow White emboldened them to keep doing that when maybe they shouldn't have. So Pinocchio was the follow-up. Pinocchio, I think, I wasn't that familiar with Pinocchio, to be honest, but it is kind of a wild movie. Like, it is a unexpected second movie from Disney in that regard. Snow White was what it was, and Pinocchio was something totally different. Um, there's some body horror in this movie with the kid being involuntarily turned into a donkey for, I'll call them, nefarious reasons. There's the sudden moment where you're in a world with like humans and stuff like that, and suddenly there's like a human-sized fox person, and you're like, I guess this is a world where human-sized fox people can be included in this. Um, there's the obviously rotoscoped character, which is definitely something that kind of dates this movie in some ways, but rotoscoping is something Disney would use off and on throughout the years. I liked Pinocchio. Like, it was a wild ride. Out of all these early movies, I think this would actually be my second recommendation after one of the movies that we'll talk about soon in the future. I'm not sure Pinocchio was a big giant success, but it would had to have been better than Fantasia. Fantasia is maybe Disney as a company's biggest lie. They promote it as being this, like, first of all, they promote it as being a financial success, and it absolutely wasn't. Um, it absolutely was not. They spent a whole bunch of money to make this movie. They spent a whole bunch of money to actually show this movie. They'd had to have specialized theaters. Like, there was a point in time where one strategy for movies was to have like a big grandiose road show where it was almost like a traveling theater play, and Fantasia kind of required certain theater specifications in order to be shown. It didn't make money. It lost a bunch of money. It caused them to do something very different with their next movie to just recoup the costs. Like, it was Walt Disney's big giant home run attempt that absolutely did not hit a home run and was probably detrimental for the company. It's also pretty patronizing, I would say. Like, it's trying to be this like grandiose thing and just kind of comes off as like a mandatory field trip to the symphony. Like, there's certain parts of it that are very out of place. Like, there's the interstitials between all the pieces where um, the tone of it is kind of weird and doesn't fit in with other things. Like, honestly, this almost feels like a packaged film in that it's a whole bunch of different shorts stuck together with some stuff in between, and your enjoyment of the movie as a whole is going to depend on your attachment to those shorts. Some of them are really are pretty good. Some of them are not so good. Some of them are like trying to teach you what this idea of music set to images would be, which comes off hilariously now, years and years and years later. But I think this is an early example of. I actually, yes, this was probably the first example of Disney Plus having a content warning, where they're saying that essentially something racist is in this movie, and we're not removing it, but we're saying it's there, so don't get angry at us. That kind of thing. And um, I think that's fine. You should probably acknowledge that the thing in the movie is messed up, and that you might need to explain to your child that it is messed up. I thought for Fantasia it was going to be something different. I thought it was going to be a very much mammy racist depiction of a black centaur, because I had heard about this. It was not. In fact, the black centaur, I think, started being removed from Fantasia maybe in the 60s or 70s or something like that. So they altered the film years and years and years ago. The version that's on Disney Plus is actually racist for. Um, there's a scene with a bunch of like dancing flowers and stuff like that, and me and my wife were watching, and when a perhaps aggressively Asian mushroom starts dancing on screen, you're like, oh yeah, that's what that was. That was why there was a content warning. Wow. Yeah, so that's why that's there. That's the first content warning Disney animated feature, but it won't be the last. I'm not a fan of Fantasia, if you can't tell. I think it is the biggest lie Disney ever told, like I said, and yeah, I probably saw it originally as a 3-year-old in a re-release, and apparently I was pulled crying out of the theater when the demon. I know it's not. I know it's not Satan, but it looks like Satan. Uh, that whole scene. As an adult, that's probably one of the more interesting things they do, but maybe not appropriate for a 3-year-old. This entire genre, or this entire era of Disney in general, I call the scare your child era, because all of these movies have at least one scene where it's strongly possibly going to scare your child. I guess it's the witch in Snow White, though. It was kind of tame. Pinocchio, it's probably the body horror. In Fantasia, it's that scene. And Dumbo, the next one, it's Elephants on Parade. That one's kind of trippy and freaky and might scare your child. But Dumbo was very short. Needed to be short because they needed to make their money back off of Fantasia. It's not great. It's kind of interesting in that it is these Leiden movies' first time that they depict an African American person, and it's the first movie that depicts the U.S. and modern U.S. society at the time. So I'm not even talking about the Crows. The Crows get this one a content warning, but there are some workers that set up and tear down the tent that have kind of a song in their own scene, and I think there's probably various other characters that are depicted as being a race other than white or Caucasian in this movie as well, as like random people in the band and stuff like that. So that is kind of an interesting historical note. Whether or not you think those characters are a racist depiction of black people is probably much more up for interpretation than the Crows themselves, which, as will happen a lot with some of these early movies, are not necessarily voiced by the actors they are supposed to be. So I believe there's some black actors that voice the Crows, but the main one I think is the same as the voice of Jiminy Cricket or something like that. I might be mixing up some of my early characters here, but not a big giant fan of Dumbo. It's kind of this short thing that it's not a fan. What I am a big fan of as a kid and now even going through this watch through was Bambi. Um, Not to say that Bambi was a runaway success or anything, but I think Bambi is closer to what Walt Disney was going for with Fantasia. Um, Bambi is almost kind of an art film in a lot of ways. It is a movie that is very light on plot and dialogue and is carried a lot by the music that's playing over the scenes and the art of it, some of which is a lot more varied and expressive than you might remember about Bambi. There's definitely scenes that get not necessarily naturalistic coloring, get more surreal and stuff like that. It's a movie about life and death. It's a movie about the eternal changing of the seasons and in correspondence with that life and death. I really like Bambi. I think it actually might be one of the few Disney classics I would agree should be called a classic, and I highly recommend you watch that. The scare your child part is definitely there, though. Not only in Bambi's mom getting shot, spoilers, but in the quail scene or pheasant scene where they're like trying to evade the hunter and they're scared and one of them runs off and gets shot. Like those parts are definitely the scare the pants off your child when it comes to that. But that is the entirety of the scare your children era. Snow White, Pinocchio, Fantasia, Dumbo, Bambi. It is early Disney. There is a seismic shift in Disney's business that is about to happen. that very much changes what they do throughout the rest of the 40s. So this early chunk is kind of its own little chunk. I think they kind of advertise all of these things as classics, but really, Bambi's great. Pinocchio's a wild ride. Snow White's the one that started it all. Some of the other stuff I can do without. I will make some more videos about various eras of Disney, and I will be sure to leave a link in the description with my blog pieces that I wrote about all of these things. So, hope you enjoyed this video.